Thank you. And our next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 19833 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau setting out a change to today's business. Could I call on Graham Day to move this motion?
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. And no member has asked to speak against the motion. The question therefore is that motion 19833 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Thank you. The next item is topical questions. Our first question from Jackie Bailey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with craft brewers about the deposit return scheme. Cabinet Secretary Rosanna Cunningham.
Scottish Government officials have met with representatives of both the Society of Independent Brewers and the Brewers Association of Scotland to discuss the deposit return scheme. SEBA also sits on working groups discussing producer and scheme administrator issues. Zero Waste Scotland also hosted a workshop for small brewers on 25th September and has continued engagement with the sector, including the publication of a sector briefing for small producers. We are securing further dates in the diary to continue engagement.
Jackie Bailey.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her response? I had the pleasure of spending yesterday morning with the Loch Lomond Brewery discussing the deposit return scheme. There was no drink taken, Presiding Officer. They are in favour of the overall principle of the scheme and fully support recycling efforts, but their concerns are about the operation of the scheme in practice. And these concerns are widely shared by other craft brewers, the glass industry, the whisky industry. Indeed, about 2/3 of submissions raise substantive concerns. Now, Loch Lomond Brewery tell me that it will cost them hundreds of pounds for a barcode for Scotland. They will need separate labels, one for bottles sold in Scotland, one for elsewhere, hundreds of pounds in incorporating barcodes for each label, thousands of pounds spent on new machines to collect recycled bottles, and many of their products are purchased in Scotland, taken abroad, so there is no chance of the bottles being recycled again in Scotland. These are small craft brewers operating with small margins. They have real concerns about the impact of the deposit return scheme for glass. They would prefer to proceed on a UK-wide basis. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if she, rather than her officials, will meet with craft brewers and their representatives to address their concerns before passing regulations?
Secretary. Well, as I indicated, officials are looking at potential for dates for meeting, and I think I need to say in response to some of what Jackie Bailey has raised there that, in fact, the Deposit Return Scotland regulations don't create a requirement for separate Scottish labelling and therefore will not mandate a separate stock-keeping unit for producers. So I think there's some issues in and around this that are perhaps arising out of a misunderstanding. It is also one of the reasons why we wanted to ensure that this scheme, when it is up and running, is actually industry-led. It is not being something designed by us. We want industry to design it, run it. The Norwegian example is the example that we are mostly attracted by. And that these issues, and they are real issues, and I understand, and I too hear them, are issues that are matters for the scheme administrator to consider the setting of. And I would really strongly encourage all small retailers, regardless of what they are, what part of the business that they are in, to be very much involved in the work that is being done to take forward the whole issue. This deposit return scheme will significantly increase the quantity and quality of glass recyclate that is then available for reprocessing, as well as doing really good work in terms of significantly reducing the amount of plastic that gets into our environment.
Jackie Bailey.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her further very welcome response? There is a real issue about the quality of recycling, and we know you get the most recycling out of white glass, less out of green glass, and nothing really from brown glass. Most bottles for drink are typically green and brown glass. There is also concern that we haven't maximised glass collection using existing means. For example, many local authorities, including my own, don't do doorstep glass recycling, and we feel they should be encouraged to do so. I'm delighted that the Cabinet Secretary mentioned industry design and run, because I think that is the heart of the issue. The key issue for me is that we involve the industry now, before the regulations are passed, given the concerns, given the misunderstanding with glass recycling. I would ask the Cabinet Secretary, would she consider introducing the deposit return scheme in 2 phases? the first dealing with plastics and cans, and the second introducing glass, to allow an opportunity for those really important discussions with the industry themselves.
Cabinet Secretary.
I hear what Jackie Bailey is asking there, but I think one of the difficulties is with this is that if you introduce a scheme that excludes glass at the start, it is almost prohibitively expensive and almost impossible to then retroactively add glass to the collection process. And I'm happy to engage directly with the member on that. Our current best available evidence on the current recycling rate for glass is that it sits at around about 64%. All of the evidence that we have suggests that those countries that have DRS schemes that include glass are getting a recycling rate in excess of 85%. So we are looking at a fairly significant uptick in the amount of glass that can be recycled through a DRS system. I think, Presiding Officer, I said right at the beginning of this process that plastics was a very easily understood and easily change over to a deposit return system on plastic. I accepted that glass had slightly greater issues attached to it. It is also, however, one of the most popular materials amongst the public for being included in this. 85% of people who've been surveyed want glass to be included, and one of the reasons for that, of course, is the very antisocial element that glass creates when it's left lying about. But I'm very happy to engage further with this. As I indicated in the initial answer, the organisations that I indicated are on they're on two separate implementation advisory working groups, and the Federation of Small Businesses also sits on the implementation advisory group. So I would hope that everybody who is involved in very particular parts of the sector is making sure that their views are being fed through their organisations onto that implementation advisory group, because that is what is going to come up with the industry-run scheme.
Maurice Golden, to be followed by Angus MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I refer members to my register of interests, and I welcome the comments from the Cabinet Secretary that the scheme will be industry and expert-led. However, under current plans, politicians will set the level of deposit through legislation rather than the scheme administrator. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that technical experts would do a better job at setting the deposit level in order to meet targets?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm not sure that I do accept that. Our decision-making around the issue of the deposit level arose directly out of the consultation that we carried out prior to embarking on this, and the public consultation reinforced the point about the majority of respondents supporting a deposit of 15 pence or more. There is a tricky issue here because the deposit has to be set precisely at that point that it doesn't create a disincentive for people buying, doesn't become a problem in the actual purchase, but isn't so low that it ceases to have the behavioural result that we want. And those are the things that we are mainly considering. Now, I do understand that there are some issues around size of container and all the rest of it that are creating some interest and debate. But at the moment, I still feel that if we're not going to start into a business of devaluing some containers in the eyes of consumers, the flat rate is the best place for us to be. But I am happy, obviously, to have these conversations with the member if there are some very specific issues that he wants to raise separately.
Angus MacDonald, to be followed by Finlay Carson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Coincidentally, our Eclair Committee has just completed a marathon evidence session on DRS with a large number of stakeholders this morning, and we look forward to the Cabinet Secretary visiting our committee next week. So, whilst recognising the need for our system to be reflective of the needs of people in Scotland, can the Cabinet Secretary outline what lessons have been learned from international evidence, other than the Norwegian example, where DRS schemes have been implemented elsewhere?
Cabinet Secretary.
Deposit return schemes operate in more than 38 countries around the world, and I think it's important that everybody reminds themselves of that. Evidence and experience from well-developed systems around the world has underpinned the development of our scheme. Key points we've learned include the importance of the scheme being owned and operated by producers in line with the principle of producer responsibility, the return to retail approach to ensure the scheme is accessible and fair, and a deposit level that encourages the right behaviour from consumers. And that goes back to the answer that I gave to Maurice Golden about the deposit level and where we think that is best placed.
And Finlay Carson.
Widespread support for a deposit return scheme, there are concerns over the data being used on current recycling rates, particularly when it comes to aluminium cans. Could the Cabinet Secretary explain why baseline data on recycling levels is being used to back up the business case when Zero Waste Scotland specifically stated it should not be used for that purpose?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm not conscious of that statement from Zero Waste Scotland. Zero Waste Scotland are involved in all of the discussions. They're very much key to what we've brought forward, what we're doing, and they're very much involved in the implementation advisory group. I'm happy to take it up with Zero Waste Scotland if the member wants to give me some context for that and query on what basis they were making that comment. But it's a rather odd one for me to hear because it's not what I'm hearing from them. So it's perhaps a conversation we can have.
And question number 2, Michelle Ballantyne.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the reports of people being treated for diphtheria in the NHS Lothian area.
Minister Joe Fitzpatrick.
We've been informed by NHS Lothian that 2 related cases of diphtheria have been confirmed in the Lothian area, with both patients having recently returned from abroad. All close contacts of these patients have been identified, contacted and followed up in line with national agreed guidelines. The likelihood of any additional cases is very small, as most people are protected by immunisation given in childhood. In Lothian, 98% of children are vaccinated against diphtheria by the age of 24 months. The best way to avoid diphtheria while travelling is to be fully vaccinated against it, and we'd encourage anyone travelling abroad to visit the Fit for Travel website, where they can access information on how to stay safe and healthy abroad, as well as destination-specific health advice.
Michelle Ballantyne.
I thank that Cabinet Secretary for that response. My thoughts are with the 2 patients that caught this dreadfully highly contagious bacterial infection, and I'm sure the Chamber will join me in that and in thanking the medical staff at NHS Lothian for their quick response and dealing with it. The Cabinet Secretary highlighted the fact that it is really important that that we get our children vaccinated when they are young and follow the schedules that are put in place, but also that when travelling, that we do actually go and seek advice. So I welcome the fact that he has reiterated that, and I hope that across the country you will agree with me that people should check that their vaccinations are up to date, and particularly with things like diphtheria, which does require a 10-year booster, that they go and check even if they're not sure.
Minister.
I thank the member for the way she's raised this question. I do think it is a good opportunity for us to remind everyone of the importance of vaccination, both in childhood and when travelling. And again, I'd recommend that people take a look at the Fit for Travel website to seek advice and, if necessary, then go and speak to their GP about what vaccinations they should have.
Michelle Ballantyne.
That's fine.
Further questions? Sarah Boyack.
Can I thank the Minister for his first answer when he mentioned the Fit for Travel website? Can the Minister think about not just the issue of getting people immunised as children, but thinking about how you raise awareness of not just the issue of diphtheria, but other contagious infections which can be widespread in other parts of the world, and to think about how we get that message out to all ages to avoid people being hit by these diseases?
Minister.
Let me be clear again. I would recommend that anyone travelling abroad should visit the Fit for Travel website and seek advice from their GP practice as to what services are available and required for their particular visit abroad.
Thank you very much. And that concludes topical questions. Now we're going to move on now to the next item of business, which is a statement by Hamza Youssef on Sheku Bayo, next steps. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, and I would encourage members who wish to ask a question to press their request to speak buttons as soon as possible.